Cemeteries connect us to our past. They are repositories of our memories. In the early 1900s, many people came to Asheville for their health. Some recovered and some didn't make it. So in 1916, a man named Samuel Feinstein bought some land off of Emma Road. And within a few months, he sold it to the West Asheville Jewish Cemetery Association, which was incorporated in 1917, making all the founders shareholders. Now, you know, you need 10 people for a minyan, but you only need one dead Jew for a cemetery. And the idea was that some of the people that came to Asheville had no funds, no relatives, but needed Jewish burials. So that was the premise for founding the cemetery. Among the founders of the cemetery, which was then called the Mount Sinai Jewish Cemetery, was Lou Pollock. And to honor him for his contributions and dedication to the cemetery, in 1949, they renamed the West Asheville Jewish Cemetery to the Lou Pollock Memorial Park. Most of the founders of the cemetery were business people, except for Rabbi Elias Fox. He was the rabbi of Congregation Bikur Cholim, which means healing the sick. And unfortunately, he was run over crossing Merriman Avenue. Now, this is a man who was an immigrant from the old country, and yet he was a Mason, which was a very civic-minded way to assimilate into the community. And so at his funeral, a portion of it was a Masonic funeral.
Doty had taken it over, and he was getting on in age, and he was looking for someone to help him out. And the cemetery seemed like an interesting place for me to get involved. I'm not really big on committees and so forth. So the cemetery we did have a committee, but as most committees are, they're not very active. So, you know, it was kind of like a one-man show, and it was easy for me to fit right in. To my knowledge, at least during my time, anybody could come and buy a plot. You didn't have to be a member because we weren't associated. So there was no alliance between the two organizations. And you know, it was interesting because many times I'd get a call from somebody who I didn't know, and you know, they'd want to bury a family member at this cemetery. So I would meet them there, and you know, it was an interesting time for me because, you know, number one, I was forced to deal with people that had a loss in their family, and then when they would pick a location, then they would struggle as to where they would, which side they would bury their loved one in. So I used to say, well, what side of the bed did he or she sleep on? And they would go, that side. So that was my little humor.
I was a member of the synagogue, and I don't read Torah. I'm not very religious, so I figured this was a good way to help out. And they asked me. They said, you know, would you like to do this? And I'm like, okay, sure, I can do this. This doesn't seem like a heavy lift. As the manager of the cemetery, I basically I sell people plots who want to be buried there. When somebody dies, I go out and mark the grave for the people for the vault company to dig the plots, and I basically keep track of the database of who's there and who's the plots sold. And
this is the whole cemetery right here. This is the gate is here, and the driveway comes up here, and then you come in and you drive around. And then the cemetery entrance used to be here, and this is called the old section, sections 1 and 2. That's all pretty much filled up right now. Section 3 is where Lou Pollock and all his relatives are buried, which is right here. This is the old section. It's pretty much full, and this section was for the non-Jewish people. The plots are 3 feet wide, and we allow 3 feet high headstones. and all the inscriptions on the headstones have to be vetted by the rabbi now. Make sure that it's that they're all kosher.
Well, in terms of the layout of a Jewish cemetery, I think actually Lou Pollock is itself a great model for a lot of what you would expect to encounter. One of the things that you would expect to find in a Jewish cemetery, although it's not universal, it's prevalent, it's very common, is the idea that the residents of the cemetery are laid out in an east-west axis. The idea there seems to be that their heads should be facing Eretz Yisrael, Jerusalem, the holy city for us, and that means that their heads would be to the west and their feet would be to the east. Another feature of traditional Jewish cemeteries, which is preserved also at Lou Pollock, interestingly enough, is that you would often find cemeteries with those buried there, their feet pointing towards the gate of the cemetery. In this case, they would point towards the east because the gate is on the eastern side, and that works out since their heads are pointed to the west. So our cemetery fulfills both customs. The reason for facing east is because of the Jewish tradition of resurrection of the dead. When the dead are resurrected at the end of history in Messianic times, according to traditional belief, when the dead are resurrected, it will be convenient for them to have their feet already pointed towards the gate of the cemetery. So as a symbolic nod to the faith in our tradition that the dead shall rise again, their feet point towards the gate. In a nod towards the centrality of the land of Israel in the Jewish consciousness, their heads are pointed towards the west, towards Jerusalem and towards Zion, towards the land of Israel. Perhaps the idea of leaving a pebble or a handful of small stones makes a certain amount of sense. In that context, perhaps it's a way of a kind of an ongoing participation in that mitzvah. We're adding a little bit of the dirt. We're adding a few pebbles. We're showing that we're not done yet respecting you and showering you with this kindness that in the Jewish tradition we're taught to display. So we're giving you this by putting the stone. And then there's my grandmother's interpretation, which when I was a little boy at the cemetery asked her, and I remember she turned to me and said, "I don't know what the true reason for this custom is, Mitchell." She said, "But I can tell you why I put a stone." She said, "I put a stone as a promise, as a commitment to visit again before weather and the climate pushes the stone away."
That's interesting. That's great.
Today we're going to hear some of the stories of people that are resting here at Lou Pollock. Pollock was one of the original shareholders of the Lou Pollock Memorial Cemetery. And he was a businessman. He had several shoe stores in Asheville and one in Florida. His Patton Avenue store would have an annual shoe giveaway on Christmas Day for all the poorer children of Asheville. And he would just line them up and say 6, 9, 8, just by looking at their feet. And if their old shoes were still usable, they would tie them together and sling them over their shoulder. If they weren't, they would build a Christmas tree of old shoes in front of the Patton Avenue store. Lou Pollock left a legacy. He was instrumental in many of the improvements that were made to the cemetery, such as roads and plantings. And his daughter Betty would come with him when he would come to the cemetery. And she continued the legacy by making yearly visits not only to her family's graves, but to check up on the maintenance of the cemetery. Barnett Feinstein was the father of Samuel Feinstein, one of the original founders of this cemetery. He died in 1918 after giving a passionate speech on Yom Kippur in front of the bima where he looked up and just dropped dead. This is when services were still being held at the Masonic Temple before Congregation Bikur Cholim had their own building. Joseph Chandler, fondly known as Dodie, was an optometrist who worked tirelessly to increase resources for people with low vision. Besides his civic involvement, he was also chair of the cemetery committee for 25 years. Robert Moog was a creative genius. He was the father of commercial electronic music. He invented modular synthesizer systems and won 2 Grammy Awards for his accomplishments. Bob Carr was the civic-minded, longtime owner of Tops for Shoes. He was instrumental in the revitalization of downtown Asheville in the 80s and 90s. Today, Tops for Shoes is still family-run in its 3rd generation. Carol Deutsch exemplified the Jewish philosophy of making the world a better place. She was a lifelong educator known for her innovative ideas, and she was also very active in the Jewish community. Harold Ruberstein was a lifelong sports enthusiast, and he played professional football for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. During World War II, he was a fighter pilot, and he was shot down over Nazi-held territory, but was able to crawl back to American lines. For this, he won the Caterpillar Award. The Caterpillar Award was a very elite award given only to people who were able to parachute from disabled planes and survive. Mills Manufacturing right here in Asheville, which made parachutes, also gave out the Caterpillar Award. So that he already had a connection to Asheville. And the idea was the caterpillar was the silk caterpillar, and your life was hanging by a thread from those silk parachutes. Sol Schulman came to the small town of Sylva, North Carolina, when he was 19 years old. He opened a clothing store called Schulman's Department Store. Despite the fact that the locals told him he would never be successful because he was selling formal wear in a town where people wore overalls, he ran that store for 71 years. The Schulmans were one of 3 Jewish families in Sylva, and so they came to Asheville to worship at Beth Israel. Among those resting at the Lou Pollock Memorial Garden are Holocaust survivors who came to Asheville to make a new life. Noach Benengo was from the Netherlands. He and his family fled to Indonesia, and during World War II were interned in a Japanese prison camp in Java. His job with American Enka brought him to Asheville, where he was the director of nylon and polyester processing. Julius Blum was from the Czech Republic, and he came here with help from Hayas. He had studied engineering and formed his own company, the Blue Jay Knitting Mills, but his true love was teaching Jewish studies, and he left an endowment for the Center for Jewish Studies at UNCA to perpetuate his dream. Ergon Friedlander was from Vienna. He fled to Belgium, and his friend Max Heller, who later became the mayor of Greenville, South Carolina, was able to bring him to the United States. Ergon joined the army and saw the horrors when the camps were liberated. He started with the Vanderbilt Shirt Company and retired as their senior manager. Miriam Rudow was from Antwerp, Belgium. She left in 1940 and met her husband in America. They ran a printing press parts business in Florida and then moved to Asheville to be near their son Mark and his family. Miriam was an vegetarian and an avid animal rights activist, as well as being very active in the dance community. Eric Wellish escaped from Austria. When he got safely to the United States, he had the chutzpah to write to President Roosevelt and ask him to bring his mother, his parents, and his sister to America. He got a response from Steve Early, the United States press secretary, and in a matter of months, the family was reunited.
About a year and a half ago, the Congregation Beth Israel decided that they would start a capital campaign which had two intentions. One was to improve the landscaping at the cemetery, and the other would be to endow the cemetery for its maintenance and improvement in the future.
We all feel it's a very special place. We're committed to this effort. Our congregants are committed, and we know we're going to have a successful campaign as a result of the feelings that we all share about the grounds of the cemetery itself. We removed all the invasives last year, took down several trees, cleaned up the whole, what we call the alley, which is the lane leading into the cemetery, and also cleaned up two of the areas which we call arroyos.
One interesting thing about the landscaping is that the committee who is in charge of this began looking into plants that are associated with the Jewish tradition for cemeteries and for burials. And it turns out that there is a tradition to somehow involve plants that have fragrance. So our landscaping plan is going to incorporate a lot of plants that have fragrance and are associated with the Bible. So for example, we've got one area where we're going to plant cedar trees, and those are in the Bible, the cedars of Lebanon, and they also have a nice fragrance. The myrtle is another one, and so the plants will be associated with fragrance and the Bible, which is in accordance with our Jewish tradition.
I think just the history of the cemetery itself is worth taking note of. Lou Pollock and his vision, and then you have generational transfer all the way to Bob Deutsch and Alan Eskovitz as principal movers of this whole change and effort to honor the people who are interred there.
So it's important to have a place you can go to remember your loved one. And when I go out there, like to visit Carol's grave. So it's if you don't have that, then where do you go? And our cemetery, when you go out there, you'll notice that it says Beit HaChaim. That's what it says as you go in. That means the house for the living or of the living, which is counterintuitive for a cemetery. So the cemetery is for the living people. It's a place for the one who died to rest, but it's, I think, more for the people who want to go and somehow relate to the one who died.
When I'm at Lou Pollock, I don't feel, and I don't think anybody around me feels We would rather not be there because death is sad and loss is hard. But given that death is part of life, and given that loss is inevitable, and given that we have to have a cemetery and find ourselves frequently, with some frequency in that cemetery, Blue Pollock is not a place that one would say, I can't wait to get out of here. It's a place that beckons the soul. Linger, stay a while, reflect. Reflect. Think about, what does it mean that this is the end? That this is what you leave behind? That a century from now, this granite stone with this inscription will be what you've left. It will be a legacy. And the entire place, with the trees and the hill and the little road and the gate, to me, the entire experience of being there says, linger, reflect, know your place in the cosmos.